Okay, so welcome back, everybody. We will now move into our next session, the pandemic of isolation. So for the past 2 years, COVID has without a doubt provoked our healthcare systems, demanding that each professional that constitutes it adapt to the ever-changing guidelines, policies, and altered workloads, while still trying to respond to the increased needs of their patients. Earlier today, we witnessed how physicians and nurses have been challenged with the struggles of dealing with COVID patients directly. Social distancing measures, telemedicine, canceled clinics, and postponed appointments have all contributed to the indirect consequences of COVID, further exacerbating the existing suffering and isolation that accompanies illness and disability. In this next section, we will witness how a physician and behavioral therapist have had to face these consequences, adapting their workload to the new norms put in place, facing the realities of isolation, while continuing to care for the already vulnerable group of individuals they work with, children and adolescents with mental illness and eating disorders, and children with autism spectrum disorder, respectively. Chen received an honors bachelor's degree in psychology from York University in 2011 and obtained her master's in applied disabilities from Brock University in 2021. She has provided both intensive behavioral intervention and applied behavioral analysis services in multiple settings, including clinic, home, school, and daycare settings. Catherine currently works as a behavior clinician at Spokes Autism, a private organization that provides evidence-based treatment for children affected by autism spectrum disorders and other developmental disabilities. She has been working with children and young adolescents with autism since 2012. Go ahead, Catherine.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I wanted to say that I'm very happy to be here, and I'm grateful for the MedConference. And at this moment, I can't help but think of the 2013 MedConference, which was titled Following the Patient, and it shaped me as a clinician, and it's continuing to do so. So I'm very grateful to all the organizers of the MedConference. As Christina mentioned, I would like to share my experience of delivering ABA treatment during the time of COVID. So applied behavior analysis is evidence-based treatment for individuals with autism. And in Ontario, the government does fund and support families and individuals based on their need. And I just want to make clear that I am not speaking to the experience of all the individuals on the spectrum. It's mostly experiences with early learners. And in our field, early learners are described as children who are 2.5 to 6 year olds. I provide in-home services, and I collaborate with families and other clinicians to develop a behavior and treatment plan that is unique to the needs of the child. And we focus on developing functional skills, which can enable the children to interact with the world. So the buzzword here is that the targets need to be socially relevant. In addition to increasing functional skills, the challenge in my field is decreasing some of the language and learning barriers that I encounter. With the early learners, what I see on a daily basis is the presence of strong and persistent negative behaviors, which is tantrums, aggressions, self-injurious behaviors. They have limited verbal and limited functions of language and limited motivation for social interaction and play. And the aspect that I find most challenging about my work is the behaviors that compete with learning, which is the self-stimulatory behaviors and the development of obsessive and compulsive behaviors. I also sometimes have to take into account physical and medical barriers like visual impairments, sleep disorders, or seizures. wanted to provide you with the timeline. So March to June 2020, all behavioral services were canceled, both in-home and center. And in June, the behavioral services resumed. We were declared as essential workers. And in March 2021, we were declared as high priority healthcare workers and were eligible for vaccination because we were within 6 feet of our learners and for over 15 minutes. Also, I wanted to briefly touch upon the COVID restrictions in Ontario. So on March 17th, Ontario declared a state of emergency with a stay-at-home order. So a prohibition of all organized public events, all services and non-essential stores were closed, schools and daycares were closed. So you can imagine with such severe restrictions, which resulted in a lack of access to normal social support and services, and the disruption that was caused with the healthy routines. What I observed was there was an exacerbation in all 3 areas of deficits, which is characteristic of individuals with autism. So the first one is the worsening of social language deficits. So many of my learners are not able to communicate their needs, are not able to ask for help. And such verbal interactions are important for children to bond with their caregivers, with the adults in their environment. And it establishes a strong foundation for social relationships. And with that piece missing, we also saw a worsening of social interaction. So poor communication repertoire did lead to a lack of social interaction, which further isolated them. Also, social skills groups, which was run by a few ABA centers, were canceled. And I found that even when the province was reopening, there was a lot of hesitancy and anxiety among parents to allow their children into community settings. And the third area, and for me, this is the most challenging, is that I observed high rates of stereotypy. So most of my learners lack functional play skills and they do not play with toys. So if you ever walk into a home, into a family room of a child who has autism, you will most likely see them engage in stereotypy. And I'll explain a little bit more in detail what that means and how it looks like. So they need adults to constantly guide them, and they always need someone to teach them how to play. But unfortunately, during the pandemic, most of the caregivers were not able to engage with their children due to their own stress, fatigue, and the frustration caused by the curtailed activities. So typical children do engage in self-stimulatory behaviors in their childhood, but for individuals with autism, these behaviors persist into adulthood, and they compete with learning, and they reduce the opportunities for social skills. So if a child is engaging in self-stimulatory behaviors, like the one you see in the pictures, lining up crayons, spinning, flapping, they are not learning. And there's one of my learners, he was obsessed with planets, and he would turn everything in his house and all play items to resemble the solar system. And it's also interesting to note, if these patterns are interrupted, they do result in very intense and long long duration of either tantrums, aggressive behaviors, and self-injurious behaviors. So as a result, I see that parents don't interfere and they don't mind because the child seems to be occupied. And when I resumed treatment sessions in June of 2020, so face masks were made mandatory, and you can imagine working with the young children with face masks, lifting them, following through with some of the problem behaviors was exceptionally challenging. At the same time, the province was in stage 3 of reopening. And I observed that children were mostly alone. They were left to their own devices. They were on their iPads, but again, they were not using them in a functional way. They would scroll to their favorite part of the video. They would repeat and watch the same part while flapping or spinning. And the primary caregivers, they were not able to participate or engage with them because they had to either take care of multiple children or they were working from home. Most of the mothers I work with are single mothers, and the grandparents would help babysit. But other than the 2.5 hours of therapy, my learners mostly engaged in self-stimulatory behaviors, and the caregivers did not have energy to engage with them or to contrive any play opportunities because they are time consuming and challenging. But I find that in kind of facing this difficulty, I realized that something unique about behavioral therapy, which we had discussed with my supervisor, but it became very apparent that the entire family needs to be part of the treatment plan. So for example, to contrast it, if a physician prescribes medication, it's just the patient has to adhere, or a physiotherapist prescribes you exercises, you need to adhere. But I find what's unique about behavior therapy is that the whole family needs to adhere to the treatment protocol because they're part of the child's environment. The whole environment needs to change. And I realized that this was very difficult during the pandemic. Parents were depressed, they were anxious. Some of them were going through marital issues, they were fatigued. And what I observed that this was in myself, that this was a point where I saw a shift in myself, in the sense of I saw myself be less judgmental towards the parents, more understanding, more patient, and repeating. I found that I never tired of repeating the same thing to them, which was very interesting for me. Another area I saw an increase was the development of obsessive behaviors. So children spending days and hours at home, the same home routine. And this reinforced the need for sameness and decreased the tolerance for change, which you would find in a natural environment, because at home, the parents have set up the environment in a perfect way to avoid any of the tantrums and problem behaviors. And it could be as simple as, the food ingredients are not the same. Again, this is a little bit of a repetition, but I did see a lot of increase in negative behaviors, but it was interesting to see that the function, the reason why they were all engaging in these behaviors was to gain attention. So I find this interesting because on the one hand, they have the limited communication and language skills and deficits with social interaction, but also at the same time, they crave engagement. They crave the social attention piece. And since they're not able to recruit them in appropriate ways, they default to what's worked in the past, and it is problem behaviors. Like, they serve as effective communication tools because parents always will attend to the child when they're crying, when they're hitting others, or they're hurting themselves. We see how these conditions brought about by the pandemic further impoverished the lives of my learners and their families. So my question was, how can I enrich the environment if I cannot venture into the community, if I cannot access the typical resources? Dollarama was shut. I was also not allowed to bring materials from outside to reduce the risk of contamination. And I was also thinking, how can I get the family on board so that they can enjoy their children and not feel constantly intimidated by them or grow tired of their problem behaviors. And so I realized that this had to start with me. Like, I had to accept the challenge and get creative. So with one of my learners, Juliana, I decided to use the materials that were available in the house. So here we are, we're cooking Indian bread from scratch in her kitchen. And I think during the pandemic, I began to really appreciate the phrase, "a little goes a long way." And this is Juliana and her sister in the kitchen cooking. And some of her clinical goals were to increase vocabulary, increase her expressive language, use adjectives, use more adverbs. So we were able to get a lot of great sentences from her, a lot of modeling. And I found that, yeah, the kids enjoyed this little activity. And one of the surprising outcomes, which I didn't plan for, was it built Juliana's confidence, and it also developed a stronger therapeutic rapport between me and her. And their grandparents got to have Indian bread for the first time. So it was a very beautiful moment. And then we had several other cooking sessions because it worked so well the first time. The second initiative was I began to collect toys from the people in my community, because I realized that I didn't want to hold my breath until things returned to normal. And I wanted to enjoy being with the children and the families. I wanted my learners to be motivated, to have fun during my sessions. So these toys served as a new stimuli. And we got plenty of verbal interaction, improvement in language. And I saw that we were able to build a bond. Yeah, and also saw that it was better for me to walk into my sessions with toys than to go to the session empty-handed. And also parents reported that what they learned, what the children learned during sessions, the parents were able to interact with them in the same manner over the weekend. So that was very satisfying to hear. Another initiative that came about during this time was the Little Life Social Skills Group. So in the past and prior to the pandemic, I facilitated several social skills groups, and they were often paired with children who were on the spectrum as well. And I found that such pairing was very challenging for us facilitators, and it induced a lot of social anxiety for the participants. Also, there was a moment where I realized that I had the opinion that everyone, even under such harsh conditions, they were still able to socialize and relatively enjoy their summer. But in spending more time with the families, talking to them, I quickly realized that this was not the case. So on September 5th, this was last year, the contagion rates were low, and outdoor gathering was allowed with a limit of 50 persons. So I took advantage of this newfound freedom, and we planned a social gathering for my learners. I had the idea to invite my friends and their children, and who are typical, and they planned all the activities. So they planned the obstacle courses, prepared songs, stories. It was a beautiful moment for all of us, and just to enjoy a light moment. And I wish I could show you Mesa. You should look at her face. She was like quite mesmerized, because this was the first time she saw a guitar. And this is in January, where the province went into the second state of emergency. So in February, we weren't able to get together in person. So we got together on Zoom and sang Christmas carols. And it was amazing to see how children enjoy Christmas songs all year round. This was the summer of this year. So Ontario initialized its roadmap to reopen. So we went on a beautiful hike, and we enjoyed some painting by the beach. And I'm always surprised when parents do show up for these events. I cannot take it for granted, because they travel great distances, and they already have quite a bit on their plate. So I asked a mother, why do you come despite your hectic schedule? And she said that she's like, I'm always happy every time I come, and I'm happy that my child is invited somewhere, because apparently children with disabilities receive very few invitations to social events. And one last thing that happened was a few mothers who are my friends wanted to do something with their children during the pandemic. They were running out of ideas as to how to spend time with their kids. And so I thought this was a beautiful way to kind of respond to that need. And also, so I proposed for them to put together craft items. So a team of mothers came together, and with their children, they prepared these craft materials. So I would send them each child's learning goals, and I would find these craft materials a week later on my porch, and each of them in each Ziploc bag, there were all the materials prepared for them, keeping in mind the specific goals and their needs. And this was very helpful for me because I didn't have the time to prepare these materials because there was so much direct therapy that I was providing. And this really helped them engage in learning. And if they're engaged, then they are engaged, that they are not engaging in stereotypy. Here you can see we worked a lot on their fine and gross motor skills. Some of them didn't know how to use glue, so it was a good opportunity for me to show them how to use glue. And this is one of the girls' room. It's all decorated with all the craft items. So in conclusion, I would like to read this quote. Knowing how to remain is effectively the first name of every practice of care. And I thought that this was true to my experience because in reflecting over the past couple of years and reflecting on all of these little initiatives, that I was able to take with the help of my friends, I realized that they are a drop in the ocean. And I can't say that these initiatives completely ameliorated their loneliness or their sense of isolation. But I found that through like these little gestures, it was my attempt to remain with them, to care for them, to stay next to them, and to respond and not be indifferent. And there was also something a friend told me, that in order to learn how to care, one must start by doing it. And I thought that this was an absurd proposition. But I think during the COVID, with all of the circumstances, I found myself testing this, and I saw that, yes, but you can learn how to care by starting to do it. That's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your work with us and showing us that even in very difficult situations, that there are always the opportunities of being creative and more resourceful. This would be a time, we have a couple of minutes left for some questions. If anyone had to share, you may write them in the chat. Some positive comments I see. I'll begin with the question to both of you, since you both work with children and adolescents, and we can understand that this is a population that requires it's already a challenged way of dealing with children because they're growing and they're developing, and you're dealing with different factors like family dynamics. So and now put in a pandemic, which then makes that even more complicated. Your work environments are changing, you're now from home, structurally they're changing, fundamentally they're changing with your colleagues. So my question is, was there something in particular in either one of your work or experiences, or something that kind of helped you remain this passion that you have to deal with this, this demanding, in a sense, group of people that and remaining positive and just this passion that you have to continue working with them despite all these changes and added stressors, like parents are now home and they're stressed, and colleagues that are burnt out, or retired physicians, and now feeling, like you said, Suzanne, like you were now becoming a resident again. So was there something in particular that has helped you remain in your passionate way of dealing with these people?
Yeah, for me, I find, referring back to Susanna's presentation of like the shared experience, I found that, yeah, like as much as like we were all suffering, but I find the difference was that moment where the whole initiative with the social skills group, and having that desire to play games with them or sing songs actually came the week after some of my friends had organized a scavenger hunt for me and my friends and their families at a local park. So it was actually, to say that I was inspired, I was moved, I was taken care of. And so when you're taken care of, I find that the impetus is there to reciprocate, and that was clear.
Yes, very clear. Thank you. Very clear and very inspiring. If there are no other questions, I will conclude by thanking you both once again for sharing your experience and your work. It's very appreciated, and I'm sure all of us were, I definitely was, but I can speak on behalf of everybody that were very marked by what you shared with us today. So thank you very much, and keep doing all this great work.